Welcome, everybody. This is our discussion session, but here are some of the ways that we're going to proceed. We've sent some questions to Swami C for consideration and presentation, and if there's time at the end of the session, then we will invite people to signal that they have a question by sending a chat to me. Don't send the question, just send the chat alert, and then we'll call on you in order of receiving that to ask your question to Swami. But to begin with, we're going to address the questions that were sent in advance, and Swami C is going to put them forth.
Yeah, very good. So I have those questions here. I'm going to answer them up until 3 o'clock. At 3 o'clock, in one worldview, we'll manage it as we do. But anybody who wants to stay online, I'm willing to stay online, indefinitely to talk and answer questions around these kinds of things. So know that to be true. And then if not, there's no consequence. Just log off at 3 o'clock after we chant. So this first question that I have here, the person writes, I was very intrigued by two things. One is to just talk plainly to God, and the other to pray only once for particular purposes. I was raised in the evangelical tradition where words and cadence of prayer was very rigid. You had to learn to use the right kind of words to show you were the right kind of Christian. I rejected that and have trouble praying out loud in front of other people to this day. Instead, I have come to feel that my prayers don't even really use words. I will get a powerful thought about a person coming to me entirely out of the blue. 9 times out of 10, I discover later that I was having those thoughts at just the time the person was undergoing a particular difficulty. I realize my thoughts of that person are my prayer, brought to me by God and sent back, hopefully, by Him to that person. It is the same thing I feel praying for people on our prayer list. I am not drawn to praying for them on a schedule for a certain number of days, but find myself drawn to just experiencing a full and meaningful thought about that person without words. And this person just wants my thoughts about that and different kinds of prayer. Well, first of all, I have to say I'm very glad that you rejected that notion of scripted prayer. It is handy as a form of ritual worship, but when it comes to your personal relationship with the beloved, He is closer to you than your own mother, closer to you than your own anyone, whatever your closest relationship is. And through His grace demonstrated in the Christ and other visitations, His whole message to us is that He wants you as you are to approach and to draw near in any condition that you're in. And to me, that is relationship. Brother St. John of the Cross, God was his betrothed. What would you not say to your betrothed? What would you not say to your bride? What would you not say to your partner, your life partner? Is there anything? Is there any boundary? And so that's the mature relationship, I think, and that's the expected or the ideal relationship. Now, prayer can be a lot of things and will change in our experience with the beloved. The scriptures say, they talk about prayer in the beginning as transactional. I'm praying about this, I want that, I need this, I can't do this, help me with that. It's transactional, conversational. And then it moves on, it's like an old married couple. It moves on a little bit past that where you've already said all of your stories and you already know each other's jokes and you already kind of get it for each other. So you don't have to say the whole thing anymore. You just kind of, sort of half sentences or a grunt in the kitchen or whatever it is, you kind of know. And then once you become familiar, when you begin to experience the presence of the divine within, when it's palpable that God is, that changes to even impetus of thought. You understand that God has heard it before you did, and there's sort of just that what I call communion at that point. It's silent prayer. You're entering into the world of meditation at that point. It's not transactional anymore. It's togetherness. When I was in New York, I guess 3 years ago now, I went to MoMA there, and me and my friend were sitting at a table in the cafeteria, and it was all, those hard top tables with a vinyl floor, and so the noise of banging trays and plates and forks and glasses and everybody talking and people and coming and going was profound. It was very loud in there. And I noticed 3 or 4 tables over to my right against the wall was this very old couple, very old. And they were both sitting there in silence with their one hand on the table, each of them, so that just their fingers were touching across the table. And they weren't talking at all. They were just eating with their with their fingers touching across the table. And I thought to myself, that is the ideal prayer with God, where you need nothing. Nothing needs to be said. Just knowing the other person is across the table, just having your fingers touch is enough. And so you close your eyes and you sit in the presence of the beloved, and there is nothing else you could desire, nothing else that you need, nothing that hasn't been heard, nothing that hasn't been discussed. And you know that all that is as it should be. Now, you can only know that when you're at that level. Up until then, we experience an imperfect world because we still have an idea of how the world should be, because we're egoistic about that kind of thing. So we're stuck. So you can't go there. You can't use that as an argument for not helping somebody because the world's already perfect. You do as God moves you to do, knowing that in that moment, that movement is perfect. So we always have to be careful about that, not assuming you're beyond your star. If God is transactional, be transactional and be happy to be with that, and stick with that and find fulfillment in it. And when he moves you beyond that, when your familiarity with God really is of the level where you don't need to talk or ask or say, because you're beginning to see and understand those things, then it will be natural to be that way. Don't let your ego drive the relationship. Be with God and be with him as you are and as you're comfortable. The primary things in any time that we approach God at any level in our quest, there's 3 very important things that are what you should be focusing on as you approach the divine. Number 1 is love, of course. To love God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Have no reservations. And that's reflected in the fact that you love your neighbor as you love yourself. It's really the same practice. It's only 2 practices when we're young, when we haven't come close to the ideal yet. And the second one is truth. All right. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday. The idea that inner integrity, what you say, what you think, and what you do are all in alignment. That means no hypocrisy. So you approach God in honesty with what you're thinking, what you're saying, and what you're doing, being in alignment. You can't sit there and talk about how much you love him and how much you love him, and then go out and purposely do things that are unpleasing to yourself, really, to do things of the body and mind that aren't helpful to touching the beloved. So that's the second one, that truth. And the third one, of course, is that sincerity and earnestness, to be earnest about your practice with God. And I had a Swami one time define earnestness. He says, you're earnest about something that you do when you have nothing else to do. So that's the definition of earnestness, that it comes from the heart. And so when you approach God, try your best at those 3 things, but all of those become utterly unimportant in the acceptance of grace. Whatever you lack in those 3 areas is covered happily by the beloved. So there's never a reason not to go to the presence of God. There's never a reason to not present yourself. The only time that happens or that feeling comes over us is when we're purposely violating our principles. And then it's not really God that's preventing us. It is really, but I mean, it's our experience of it is God preventing us. But the actuality is it's our own self blocking access to the higher truths because you're distracted by something that's making noise in your mind and you can't hear the song behind things. So prayer can take you all the way to God. Many of the sages have said that prayer as a practice in and of itself can take you the whole distance uh, from being our own deceived selves to knowing God. So hold on to prayer, and like Brother Lawrence, make your life a prayer. Try to develop an awareness so that you come to understand that everything that you do in a day is a prayer. Every action you take is a prayer. Every thought you have is a prayer. Uh, and do that with awareness. And through that single-mindedness, then you can quicken your path to God. You can get there much faster because you'll know what you're praying for. And like I mentioned yesterday, it's a conviction of mine that God says yes to every prayer, but he averages them all together. So he takes your whole person as a measure of what you're praying for and answers it. So keep that in mind as we pray. If you're going to, if you're going to pray for help with your alcoholism, but you're going to meet John at the bar tonight, that's 2 prayers. And the average of them might not be your sobriety. So you have to keep that in mind. Your prayers and your actions are the same. All right, so another question here. It says, how can we reconcile Brother Lawrence's insistence on suffering at the end of his life with his complete abandonment of God? According to Abbé de Beaufort, in the eulogy, when Brother Lawrence was near death, he deliberately chose to lie on the side that gave him most pain and kept him from breathing properly due to his pleurisy. How can he choose to create more pain for himself when God has already shown him that he is accepted just as he is? In the 11th letter, he speaks of suffering as a grace and talks of those who consider their sufferings as coming from the hand of God, as effects of his mercy, and as means that he uses for their salvation. In the 13th letter, he says, I cannot understand how a soul who is with God and who wants only him is capable of suffering. My own experience proves this. And yet at the end of his life, he himself decides he must suffer more than God has granted him, though his brothers turn him over to relieve his suffering. I'm puzzled by this. And so we'll talk about that. Yeah, the early church had a peculiar relationship with suffering, and I think some of it comes from culture. It was a predominant teaching at some point. However, within the context of knowing God, there's this idea that we have to break our identity with the material. We have to break our attachment to our ego, our mind, our body. We have to come to a point of surrender. And the easiest, not the easiest, definitely not the easiest, but certainly one of the most effective ways of that is suffering. If it's one of the reasons I believe that we age, growing old is the highest sign of grace from God, because our bodies literally get to the point of us wanting to throw them away. They literally slowly bring us to the point of like, oh God, everything hurts. I'm hideous. My face is melted. My body is melted. My hair is falling out. All these every day, those little things that you couldn't see at all when you were 20 have suddenly taken on a life of their own on your face. And all of that, it's the grace of the beloved getting you, trying to shake your hand, let go of those scissors, to get you to put your eyes on that eternal self. And by whittling away your abilities to get your enjoyments and to get your distractions through the body and mind, by slowly taking that away, he draws you closer to himself. And so that can be viewed as a grace, where suffering is a grace in the sense that it will make you let go of those things as a distraction, as a source of your comfort, your pleasure, your enjoyment, your solace, your refuge. And eventually you will go to God alone as a refuge. And let's see if I can get there without ruining anything. Yeah, he says himself, let's see, what conversation is this that I'm reading? In the second conversation, in his own words, he says, all bodily mortifications and other exercises are useless, except as they serve to arrive at the union with God by love. So it's in and of themselves, suffering in and of itself is useless. He's not going to endorse it as a thing that's valuable in and of itself. The thing that gives it its value, he's saying here, is that it serves you to move toward that union with the beloved. And what is that? That is the abnegation of ego, of body and mind. It's the surrender of everything that you would call me and mine. And so suffering as a means toward that end is valuable. Suffering as suffering is useless, has no value. It's not an ideal, it's a tool. So that's his perspective on it in a general way. I hope that answers the question. If it doesn't, pop it up at 3 o'clock again. All right, Lawrence speaks of faith quite often without defining it. It appears that he does not think of it as tied to any doctrine of believing certain things about God, but rather it seems more like trust, trusting in God's providence and love. Yes, you're absolutely right. The way that I like to approach this idea of faith is that it's an intuitive understanding of things that are, that have no cause. And I like to point out two things when I talk about this. One is we have a notion of immortality. If we were truly material beings and everything in our mind only came in through the senses and through this world of material, we would never have developed the concept of immortality, because there is no example, no experience of immortality anywhere in the creation by anything. And so this idea of immortality is one of those things of faith. It's this intuitive thing that we have brought with us. We have brought the sense of immortality into existence with us because it is our nature. And Swami Vivekananda makes an interesting and fun point. He says that's the reason everything in creation runs in circles, because a circle is the closest approximation to infinity that you can express in the finite. So atoms go in circles, planets go in circles, solar systems go in circles, galaxies go in circles, seasons go in circles, we go in circles. And so this notion of immortality is a sense of faith. Also, the sense of infinity. The idea of infinity is another thing that we intuit, that we bring in with us, because there's nothing that we know in this world that is infinite. The mind, when it thinks of infinite, it only thinks really big. Infinity is beyond that. And so these ideas of faith are, with God, you have to have faith in his existence because there's no cause to it. You see, when the mind has time, space, and causation. Time, space, and causation belong to the mind, and it assigns those qualities to everything that come in through the senses, time, space, causation. And then it looks for difference and categorizes. That's all the mind does. The mind looks for difference and categorizes. So there are things that we experience, the I am, for existence, our own being, that does not have a cause. And so it will never be provable. Like Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Well, before that first thought, you existed. It's unprovable. Even your own existence is unprovable. The world outside of your senses is unprovable. You don't know what the source of your senses are. You see, we talked, I don't know if I mentioned that yesterday or not. It's one of my favorite things to contemplate, though. Your brain is in a black box. It's in your cranium. It has never seen the light of day. It has never heard a sound. It has never felt a touch. It has no direct experience of any of those things. What it gets is biochemical information through your nerve endings. It has no way of knowing where that information is coming from. It cannot validate that. So you are living in a mind, not in a world. You have assumed it's a world. You have faith that it's a world, but it is not a world. You live within a mind. And you can manipulate that. Just watch YouTube videos with people with VR helmets on, falling into their televisions and tipping their chairs over. It's very easy to fool the mind with the senses. So you know that they cannot be verified. You cannot know their source. And it's nice to know that when you look at a light, you would swear that's what you're seeing, but you have no idea what the eye is seeing. All you're getting is the bioelectrical signals from the optic nerve going to your brain. You're not getting any light into the brain at all. But the brain has created a symbol for light. And when you look at a light, you're looking at your symbol for light. And the interesting thing about it is that you don't know if my symbol for light and your symbol for light are similar at all. They could be radically different. And there's no way for us to know, because everything that I would say about light, you would say about light. You would just be looking at a different symbol for it. And so there's no way to validate those things. So living in that kind of space, and these things become more apparent as you grow in your prayer life and your contemplative life, you begin to see these things more clearly. And when you start getting into that space, you have to have a knowledge that's beyond cause, that's beyond time, space, and causation, that's beyond the senses. And that comes from the intuitive self. Very much like I mentioned yesterday, it comes in the same way that you have faith that your face is there, even though you will never see your face. You will only see reflections of your face. And see, it's very much the same with God, in the sense that thou art that you are the image of God, that God is the eternal subject. He will never be seen as such. When he appears, it's always in a form as a symbol of self, but you will never see God. His existence, the same as your own existence, is a matter of faith, because the mind cannot come up with a causal relationship with God. It cannot. He does not break into his three components of time, space, causation. And there is no subject object in the beloved. All is the beloved. All is God and more. And so because it does not meet the restrictions necessary for the mind to conceive of it, it has to remain transcendental. So faith is knowing those things without cause. And they have to be there because of the limitation of mind, that there is no explanation for the things beyond cause. There is no explanation for the things that do not break into that category of subject-object. So faith is knowing those things. And the things that we put in there is the existence of God, the nature of God, our own existence, the nature of our existence. Those are things of faith, the fundamentals that will have no cause and cannot be tested through the mind and through the senses, because they are transcendent to those. They don't meet the qualifications necessary for using that tool, just like you will never be able to bring water up from the well with a hammer. In the same way, you will not be able to use your mind to find God. So that's how faith is used. And it kind of holds your world together when it begins to dissolve in your spiritual practice. When the external world begins to kind of lose its absolute value to you, when you begin to doubt its acceptance, it is where it is the God you back into, knowing that he's there. In the same way, I went on in New Zealand, on the South Island, I went blackwater rafting, which is rafting an underground river. And so we climbed into a cave and rafted a river underground, pitch black dark, except for the little 40-watt bulb on our lamps. And we got to one point where we were at the top of a waterfall, and we had to wedge our inner tubes. We had to bend over and wedge our inner tubes around our backside. And the guide pushed us backwards off of the cliff into nothingness down there. You couldn't see the bottom. The 40-watt bulb wasn't bright enough to see where he was pushing you. So you had to take faith. There was no way for you to know. You just had to say, okay, wow, I'm sure this is because I've been told it is. And I put my faith in you, push me off the cliff. And it's very much the same way with the beloved. When you let go of yourself, when you let go to fall into something that cannot be proved, It takes faith to let go. You have to say, God, there's no way for me to know this. There's no way for me to understand this. There's no way for me to prove this. But I have been told, and it seems from the reflections of you that I see in your creation, that you are of love, and you are of grace, that you are there. And so in that faith, I let go. In that faith, I abnegate my sense of self into your hands. So that's where that goes. And what does it mean to trust God? That's the second question. That's very much the same. Trusting God is you hear it from your teacher, you hear it from the scriptures, and you intuit some with your mind. Putting your faith in those words, even though you might not fully understand, you're not quite sure. Ramakrishna gives a prayer for atheists. He says, if you're an atheist, it's not a problem. He says that's just one step in the spiritual path, is going through a period of atheism. He says, if that's where you are, when you pray, just say, God, I don't know if you're there. And, I have no reason to believe it. And I might even actually doubt it. But if you are there, I'm praying to you. The faith that would make you pray a prayer like that, that's faith. It's that I don't know, but I'm taking a chance, and I'm going to see where this chance takes me. And then these things that are obvious become apparent. They become self-evident in time. So it's that impetus for going forward, even if you doubt, even if you're not sure. You're going to make the investigation, you're going to make the effort. And then it becomes kind of a self-feeding process. As you go along in spiritual life, you have undeniable experiences of God. You meet people that have undeniable connections with the beloved and make undeniable impressions on you. And that faith grows and it grows. And you meet people, if you're fortunate, you'll meet somebody who's had that unitive experience, and you're changed. But it's that thing that gives you that impetus to start. That's faith. It's the same faith that makes you put the first foot forward, and it's the same faith at the end when you go off the cliff, when you jump into the chasm. So what is ours to do? You must do what arises in you to do, in essence. As long as you see yourself as a doer, you must do your duty. Do what is necessary in the moment that it's necessary. And, as long as you're the doer, you take responsibility for it. In the mature state, with somebody who's walking in that space with the beloved, there's no sense of doership. Everything that needs to be done arises spontaneously in the moment. And in that moment, the realized soul always acts perfectly, because you have no will of your own based on body-mind anymore. Your will is the universal will, because you've surrendered, you've let go. As long as you have your own will, or as long as you're taking responsibility or feeling responsible for it, you do what is necessary in the moment, according to what you know of the nature of the beloved and the nature of your responsibility. And you go forward with that until it changes, until your understanding changes like that. You can always know that the ultimate truth is you are not the doer. God alone is the doer. And, ego has given you this illusion of free will for the fun of the beloved. If there's no explanation for why that happened, or why God has created anything, why he's done this. So what is yours to do is what God has given you to do as you perceive it in the moment, in accordance with what you know of him and of the scriptures and of your nature for where you're at in the moment. And to, in that, keep your eyes on the ideal. So you're always being brought forward in that. Where does hope come in? Well, hope comes in where faith fails, really. If you don't really believe that things are of God and that all things are working together for good, then you've got to have some hope. Gosh, I hope this turns out. Because if you believe that all things are working together for your good and that is the nature of the universe is love, there's no need for hope. You can be assured that the best will come, that the divine message, the divine love will be. So hope is a band-aid for broken faith, I would say. How does it mesh with trust? Yeah, that's the same idea. Hope fills in where trust fails. You kind of, I don't really trust you, but I hope you're telling the truth, and you jump anyway. So hope is where you make up for. It's a decision, really. You decide to make up for what you lack in trust or faith. Lawrence speaks of the difference between acts of understanding and those of will. The will are of important, and the understanding. When he's talking about the will there, he's talking about divine will. So the universal will is the important will, and ultimately it's the only will. Anything that gives us an illusion of self-will is delusional. The way that I like to think of that, I think I shared this 2 years ago, but that the illustration that really taught me this was being in the Phoenix airport, and there was one of these video game consoles with a big steering wheel and a track that this video car was racing around, a couple of other computer generated cars. And there was like a 4-year-old boy standing there. He could hardly reach the steering wheel, but he was looking up the screen and he was very carefully driving his car around the track on the screen. And his father came over and was like, "Joey, it's time to get on the plane. They just announced our plane." And Joey's like, "Okay, I can't go right now, Dad. The car's going to crash. The car's going to crash." He's like, "Joey, come on. We got to go. We got to go." And he pulls the boy, and the boy is looking back. And as he goes away, I realized the boy had never put a quarter in the machine, that it was on demo mode. But because he was watching the car turn right and he would turn right, and then he wanted to keep the car on the same road that the computer wanted to keep it on, he assumed responsibility for himself and so continued to drive that car very carefully, thinking he was doing it marvelously successfully because it hadn't crashed, and round he was going. And then he had enough faith, actually he was pulled away from the steering wheel. He let go and he realized, oh my God, it's going on without me. I wasn't the doer, but he was under the delusion, the childish delusion that he was in charge and he was in control. Life for us is no different from that. We generally want the same things. We want to be healthy, we want to be loved, we want to love, we want good friends, we want the world to be at peace. So in a general way, we work toward all of those things. And in a general way, we're in accordance with the divine will. And so we assume, hey, I'm doing pretty good. And when things go radically different, we make up a story for why that happened. My favorite way to talk about this is, I remember in high school, I'd always make plans for my weekend. And as I look back, almost never did my plan for the weekend actually manifest the way that I had planned it. But I never let go of the idea that I planned my weekends. And so what would happen is on Monday, I would say, okay, on Friday night, I'm going to Caro's with John and Betty, and we're going to, have nachos. And somehow when Friday night came, I was at the movies with Jason and Burgundy, and we were watching Star Wars. Now, I still maintained that I had planned my weekend, but all I did was keep changing my plan as I was presented with a reality that was coming down the pike. But the ego will continue to make a story up that keeps you in charge no matter what. And so this is an act. This is that act of understanding, as such, I guess. When you are acting in accordance with the divine will much of the time, and it seems like you're in charge and you're going, but the act of the divine will is the important one, which means that's what's happening, and that's what's going to happen regardless of what you're thinking, regardless of what you're doing. And to the degree that you're out of step with that divine will, to that degree you suffer. To that degree, there's pain in your life. There's anxiety in your life. There's suffering going on. That's why Sri Nisargadatta, one of those sages that I like to read about, he says that all pain and suffering is an invitation into inquiry, to look closely at your life. What are you holding on to that God is trying to get you to let go of? Because he's slapping your hand. Let go, let go, let go, let go. And you're like, ow, ow, ow. I don't want to let go. So the difference there is that the understanding coming from yourself, from your own mind, from your own perceptions of the world, and the will being what actually is the will of God, the divine will. And it's the will of God that obviously is running the show. The rest is an illusion. Your free will, I'm sorry to say, is an illusion. All right. Lawrence speaks of resignation and renunciation often in the, excuse me, in the first conversation. Are renunciation and resignation the same? What do they mean? Okay. I don't think they're the same thing. Mature renunciation is when if a child is playing with scissors and you know if you take the scissors away, he's going to scream and kick and throw things. So you devise, as a mother, a very masterful way of giving him a red ball in exchange for the scissors. What he does is then he very willfully lets go of the scissors because he knows that he wants the ball. That is mature renunciation. It's when we understand the value of doing what is right and we willingly, even enthusiastically, let go of our vice, the thing that is hurting us that we may not have known previously that it was hurting us. True renunciation is keeping your eye on the higher thing and willfully letting go of the lower things. So once you understand that something in your life is not helpful to you, you let go of it immediately. That's renunciation. If you try and renounce before you're ready to let go, weird things are going to happen. You're going to get what I call a spiritual hernia, which means your desire for that thing is going to express weirdly in another way. Some fetish will develop, or some odd thinking will develop around it, some compulsive behavior. So it's very clear, very important to understand that as important as renunciation is discernment. It's trying to understand why the beloved is telling you not to do that, why that is not helpful. And it's looking closely at your life to see how are my vices not helpful so that I can let go of them. Because you won't successfully be able to do it just because, well, I'm going to take that back. If you are truly earnest and sincere, you will be able to let go of it just because God says so. But if you're lacking in the earnestness department and you prematurely let go of something, you won't be successful in it. It'll become a compulsive, an obsessive compulsive outcome, in my own opinion on that. So that's renunciation. Renunciation is letting go of the things of the world because you see the things of God. You understand the divine will that they're, when you know this we talked about that yesterday a little bit, that this idea of free will, when confronted with pure love and pure intelligence, is rather vulgar. It makes room for you to think you could come up with something better than God, that you have a better way of doing things that's valid and should be explored. Now, God may definitely, indeed, that it should be explored, and He'll allow you to do it, for your training, for your growth. But in fact, He's going to bring you home. He's going to get those scissors out of your hand, one way or the other. Resignation, I think, has more to do with will than things of the senses. Renunciation's more your physical world type things. You renounce your pleasures and things that delude your mind, that satisfy your sense of me and mine. You renounce those, and you resign the mental things like your will. You resign your to the way things are. It's like, okay, it didn't happen that way, and I'm fine. Okay, it didn't happen that way, I'm fine. I'm resigned to the way things are, to the will of God, is another way of saying that. So I resign to the way things are. I accept these things. even though they may not be what I want, may not be what I hoped, what I dreamed. It's because of the nature of God that you are willing to accept that. So you resign yourself to them. I don't think it's necessarily healthy. I think it's necessary sometimes, but resignation still means that you have a reservation. You have a space inside that you're still measuring it as being kind of, I would do it differently, which is all right, as long as you're honest about that with the beloved. He doesn't mind that at all. He actually likes it. A little bit of sauce in the relationship is good, because it makes for a deeper relationship. It makes for a more organic development, where your earnestness and your sincerity can really be expressed. And when that begins to happen, truth really shines, and growth comes very quickly. Could you talk more about attachment and detachment? Absolutely. This is fundamental. Oh, but how to do it? Attachment is me and mine. Okay. The action of me and mine. Depending on where you're at in your practice, this may or may not make sense. They say, or some of the scriptures have said, some realized souls have said, that pure mind and God are one and the same. Okay, that's a hard thing to swallow, but assume that the pure mind and God is one and the same. And a pure mind is a mind that has no egoistic intrusion at all, no sense of me and mine. And its nature is love and intelligence and existence. Now, as things arise in the mind, if you don't attach a me and a mine to them, they just come and go. It doesn't go any farther. They just come and go. So you sit there, and the idea of smoking pot comes into the mind and then goes out of the mind. Now, as soon as a thought comes into the mind and you say, oh, I'm thinking of smoking pot. Well, now you have hooked the diodes up to the battery. That sense of I is the empowerment. And you are now empowering the thought or empowering the desire for your vice, whatever it is. If you had not associated it with the sense of I, it would have no power, and it would have just come and gone. And we call that process of sticking the two fingers, you got two fingers, you got a finger called me and a finger called mine, and you're dipping them into that pure mind, and you're disturbing the waters. And that is attachment. And detachment is the reverse. You pull out the fingers of me and mine, and you don't identify with the changing nature of this world. Anything that changes, you don't give credence to. It's that unchanging sense of self alone, the I am, that you define yourself by, and by its known nature, which is love, intelligence, and existence. So as you sit there watching your mind, it's quite a wonderful practice. It's a Buddhist, very strong Buddhist practice, a Jnana Yoga practice, to sit there and watch the mind, name things and let them go. It's a practice in becoming aware of what's in the mind, but also a practice of naming it and letting it go, so you don't attach to anything. Now, experientially, I can tell you that you become aware of a very deep sense of bliss that is natural to you when you do that practice. But as soon as that bliss enters into awareness or comes into mind, you'll immediately think, I'm having a great meditation. You attach your I to the experience, and suddenly the water ripples and the experience is done. The experience is gone. So that is attachment. Attachment is anything that you can't help but put your me and mine to, that you just can't help claiming and owning it. And so you take it. It's the reason for memory. Everything in your memory is something you've attached to. Okay. And yeah, that just continues on. So detachment is letting go of those things that change and clinging to that which does not change in yourself. And I remember the first time I heard that. Actually, Ramakrishna says that which changes is unreal. That which is unchanging alone is real. I read that scripture and I went running to the shrine thinking, now I've got something concrete I can hold on to. I'm going to find God. This is going to be great. And I went in there, I sat in there for like 2.5 hours trying to become aware of that which is unchanging, and all kinds of things were in my mind. And I went to the lunch table with Swami Prabhupada, and I said, Maharaj, I said, I just spent 2.5 hours trying to find that which is unchanging, which is supposed to be the only thing that's real. And I can't find anything that doesn't change. And Swami very solemnly looked at me, very quiet for a moment, and he said, did you consider that which was looking? And then I had that epiphany, like, oh my God, that self which is looking for the unchanging, that in me that was asking the question, that in me that has been in me through my whole life, looking out through my eyes, that is the unchanging self, that is the soul that will survive the body as it has already survived all the different ages of the body. My 5-year-old body is long dead. All of the cells that were in that 5-year-old body are dead. They're gone, sloughed off, replaced. And when I reach my 110-year-old body, it will be no different in that sense. The body will have dropped off, but that which is unchanging will remain. My sense of being, that I of I, the I am, is eternal and will experience the moment forever. So that is there. Now let's go back to this idea, just for fun, of the pure mind. The idea in these paths that don't require the idea of a personal God. Now this is going to be very foreign to Christian theology, but just bear with me for fun. We're going to talk about it. This notion that if you're looking at the moon in its reflection in a lake, if that lake is perfectly still, you can see the unity of the moon. You can see the whole moon as it is in that lake. When that lake ripples, you cannot see the unity of the moon. You see a multiplicity of little white shards as the moon is broken into thousands of pieces on the surface. And so the sages say that if you think of your mind in the same way, that the mind that you're looking at is the reflection of God. And if you cannot touch that reflection with any sense of me and mine, any sense of particularization, you will see God. You will see God in oneness, in that wholeness, and this universe of multiplicity will resolve into that perfect picture of the one without a second. But this constant temptation of ours to eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, to make ourselves our own judge as to what is right and wrong, to hollow out that space in the world where we exist and God does not, that process ripples the lake of your mind, and you cease to be able to see God, to understand God. And if you are forgetful of what that reflection was, in order to return to it is just seems nigh impossible, which is why Jesus comes, because the path of jnana, and Ramakrishna says in this age, this day and age, is impossible almost to follow because of the amount of support it requires from the society around you for you to maintain a state of one without a second and a practice of one without a second. It is impossible. He says these days, God is the stomach. Our desires and hungers have too much control in the modern world. And so that's why bhakti yoga, the practice of devotion, which is Christianity, is the fastest and most effective way to know God. But it's always kind of good to get the general picture so you can use these pieces as they are helpful to you. You don't have to take them on as a doctrine or a dogma if you don't like. Just take them on as a parable, a possibility for learning how to interact with your mind without getting caught in it. Because most of us have never had the experience of stepping out of the mind. We really don't even know where to begin with that kind of practice, because we're so engrossed. Mind and me are the same thing. We're so accustomed to me and mind being mixed in there that separating them at this point seems nigh impossible. But just take the knowledge that you are not the mind and use that in order to weaken your vices, in order to weaken your bad habits and your wrong ideation about what is satisfying in this world. Because once you're able to do that, to separate from the mind, then you will naturally do as God does, and you will naturally think as God thinks, as such. And the scriptures will be your personality. The scriptures will be your natural inclination, because it is your natural state. It is the state of the pre-fall Adam and Eve in the garden. That Eden is included in your nature. It is who you are. Could you talk more about awareness and its importance? Well, yes, awareness is God. Awareness is the I am. You are the eternal subject. So the practice of awareness is the riddance of delusion. You end the distraction of sense enjoyment. You end the distraction of ego. And you are completely aware of what is without any projection on it, without any assumption about it. So in our experience, there's actually two things. There's awareness, and then there's the awareness of awareness. God is awareness. We have our existence in the awareness of awareness. And that ultimate unitive experience is when we settle in to that still lake and give up the awareness of awareness, and we are just aware. So there's no calculation going on, there's no analyzing going on, there's no thought process going on. As God wills, we do. There's that sense of ego has disappeared. And of course, for us as mere mortals, that's an unlikely state. That's reaching the state of perfection. We can get very close, but the teachers say that to actually become egoless is not really within the realm of possibilities. We get as close as we can to the beloved, and grace covers the rest, really. So that's why we hold on to grace as our main function. We cannot, even if we could get all the way to the edge. It's like if you're how do you word this? If you are a bundle of straw and you're removing your straw one piece at a straw as in hay, one piece at a time, when you get down to that last piece, who is there to remove it? Right? You can't remove the last piece of you because there's no one to do it. It's the last vestige of you. And so that is grace at that point. Grace can remove that last vestige of ego, but you as a person cannot do that, because that final act of will requires a greater act of will. And if you have completely abnegated all sense of self, who is there to take that last step? That's why St. John of the Cross talks about going to the edge of the chasm, but we cannot cross the chasm but by grace. And so his spiritual life at first was working his way to the edge of that chasm, which was living a Christ aware life, being motivated by the sense of being, it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. That can take us all the way to the edge of the chasm. And he built his bridal chamber there at the edge of the chasm. And his practice was no longer about reaching God, but waiting for God. And in that waiting period, he decorated his bridal chamber so that when the beloved came, it was the most special and beautiful place possible for that union. So that's a very wonderful way, especially in a devotional practice like we all have, of thinking about these things instead of talking in terms of the scientific approach of attachment and detachment. Know that that is the reality of it, but the way that we experience it is building our bridal chamber, decorating our inner shrine to be beautiful and as pure as possible, that there would be nothing there that would be offensive to our groom, our bride, our husband, our husband to be, our betrothed, when he comes for that union. And I always liked that image. It was very helpful. So first of all, find out that you have an inner chamber, that you have a shrine in the heart, and then certainly understand that God inhabits that shrine, and then get in the practice of being aware of that shrine by visiting it as many times a day as you can, and then move in and change that shrine into your bridal chamber, and then just decorate the tar out of it. Just put verses on the walls and learn songs and sing beautiful prayers and dance around in wonderful anticipation of your union with the beloved. And he will send you gifts and constant little reminders that he's close and on his way. Saint Teresa of Avila shares consistently with us. And so we do that. Um, and that's there. So that's awareness, that's attachment and detachment. How do we keep our minds from governing us? Remove the I in mind. Your mind has no authority over you whatsoever but what you give it. You, the self, the I am, is the only source of power in the universe. It is the only source of power in the universe. It cannot govern you. So the best way to not let it is to know that, and to realize that if you're arguing with your mind, it's because you want to lose. That's very important to know. If you're arguing with your mind, it's because you want to lose. Your no is no. You're the only one in charge. If your mind is arguing with you, it's because you've given it a little sense of I and mine. You've owned a little bit of it and are identifying with it, and it is using your power to argue with you. So know that you are in charge. You can say no to the mind, and like a 2-year-old, he may throw things and scream at you and yell at you and whatnot, but you are the parent. The I am is the parent. As long as you hold on to that understanding and don't divide yourself, you will be victorious. But know, if you divide yourself, you're doing it because you're flirting with losing. You're hoping that after you feel you've reached a level where, this is the way my mind works anyway. I may be betraying too much about my own mess of a self, but what happens is, if you argue with your mind, if you actually make it a battle, allow it to become a battle, say you want to have that drink, just for something to say, you want to have that drink and you're trying not to drink, you just say no, and you just don't drink. But the mind is going to throw up about how much fun it was. It's going to remind you about all the nice parties and how much you like that feeling and how relaxing it would be. And oh, it's just a drink. And oh, it doesn't matter. And who cares? What's the big deal? Just have some. The only reason that you enter into that conversation is because after you've done it for a while, you'll feel like you've fought hard enough to justify giving in, and you won't have to feel bad about it. Well, I tried. Now I'll just go ask forgiveness and move on. Which is a way of being, certainly, like the mother's not going to throw the toddler in the pool because he ate the cookie. God is the same way. God gets it. God knows it. But you're going to hurt. There's going to be a little bit of pain because you violated your own principle. You broke your own will, and so you retarded your growth. You retarded your chance at moving forward. And so we just sit there and cycle for a while in these ways until we learn. But if you're asking the straight up question, how do we have the mind not take power over us? Don't give it the power. It doesn't have any of its own accord. You are the only power in the universe. What is the role of imagination? Wonderful. Imagination is the first step toward creation, the first step of creation. Everything that is comes from meditation, comes from imagination. Where I'm sitting right now, without imagination, I'd be sitting about 12 feet underground. But somebody at some point imagined a temple in this site. And as they imagined this temple, they imagined it would have a basement. So that was their first step toward creation. The second step was they wrote it down. They drew a picture of it. They measured it out. And the third manifestation was coming up with the resources. And the fourth was to get the people to do it. And now I am literally sitting in something that was at one time pure imagination. So imagination is how creation happens. It's the process of creation. That's why in Vedanta we teach very strongly, you become what you think. And that's why we're very opposed to going around saying, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner. If you identify with being a sinner you will become. You have to remember what you were before you ate the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. I am divine. I am in harmony with God. I am of the nature of love. I am of the nature of intelligence, and I exist. You emphasize those qualities, the highest ideals, because what you think, you become. That's how creation manifests. That's how it happens. And interestingly enough, in the bhakti tradition, the devotion tradition, which we're all involved in here, that inner prayer begins in imagination. At first, you imagine the presence of God. You're imagining that you're talking with God. You're imagining that you're communing with God. And what happens over time is you realize, that's why they call it realization, you realize that you weren't imagining, that God is present. God is real. And then you keep going and it gets really startling because you begin to understand that you were the imagination, that you were the thing that wasn't real, that God alone is the substance, God alone is that which is. And at that point, hopefully you have the good sense to resign, to let go of all the need to be separate, all the need to be apart. Although I'm talking about the Vedantic scriptures, which isn't a big concern to everybody, but one of the things in there, they say that there is the possibility, though, that there is such thing as a heaven, if you want it as such, because Ramakrishna says, oh, there are some people who want to taste sugar, they don't want to be sugar. And so God does have this allowance for enjoying himself eternally as a sense of other. And so there can be, there is a heaven. There is an eternal heaven for those who have, are of that nature, that disposition. They don't want to be sugar. They want to taste sugar. So we don't need to jump into that. That was more just a fun little morsel to think about. All right. The role of our wills. Well, the role of our wills is what slowly leads us to an understanding of what we are, of who we are. Our will comes from wrong ideation. It comes from the wrong idea that we might know better. And so we follow that out through the act of will in order to learn that it only causes us pain to do so. And then eventually we let go. So that's the role of will. And what does soul mean? Yeah, soul has many meanings, actually. The sages say that there is only one soul, that God is that there's one without a second. So I've imagined the way I've explained it to my own mind anyway, or my own mind has explained it to me, I don't know. Take a dishcloth, poke your finger up in it and put a rubber band around your finger, and then pull your finger out. Now you've got a little nipple in the dishcloth. And then do that again and again and again. Each one of those nipples that you've created in the dishcloth is still only the dishcloth. And yet they have a recognizable form separate from the dishcloth that you can point at and describe and talk about. The universal self, God, as one without a second, is that dishcloth. You and I are the little nipples, and the little rubber band around that is our sense of me and mine, that we've associated with our independence, that we've associated with our attributes, our limitations and restrictions. So it's us identifying with the finite. God has moved into this body and forgotten that he is the entirety of it and has become just this body. And so we live life as if we're just this body. Now you say, well, that's far-fetched, but then I'll tell you, you do that every single night. Think about it in your dream. When you dream, you are, in fact, everybody in that dream. They are all of your mind alone. You are the only one sleeping in the bed, well, unless you've got a partner, but that's irrelevant. You're the only one. And yet, for some reason, in your dream world, you have created a dream body that is separate from your living body, separate from the sleeping body, because this one's active and running around the streets of New York in the middle of the night. And it has terrible problems, like the monsters that are coming up out of the sewers and riding the buses in order to hunt you down. But those monsters are you equally. You created every one of them of your own self, out of your own mind. And the sages say that it's not exactly the same because God is bigger than even that. But he says the process is the same. That your existence here is of the same nature as your existence in the dream. In the dream, you're the sleeper, but you don't know that. You think you're the dreamed and you identify with it. That's why you're running away from the monsters. You think they can kill you, although they cannot. And in this world, you think that you are separate from God and that you can be killed, but in fact, you cannot and are not. And so that is the nature of the manifest world, that it is not real, it is illusory. And just like in the dream, even though it's utterly illusory, you are utterly convinced of its reality, absolutely all the way down. And if you can manage to have an elusive or a lucid dream, where you become aware of dreaming, then you are in control of the entire dream. And the sages say, and have experienced such, that this world is the same. And that's what Jesus was alluding to when he says, I tell you the truth. And he gets more exacting than that. He says, verily, I tell you the truth. If you have the faith the size of a mustard seed and you say to this mountain, get up and throw yourself in the sea, I tell you the truth, it will throw itself into the sea. So you see, he's pointing at the same idea, that this world, if you begin to understand the nature of this world, when you begin to understand the fact that you are the sleeping divine, and that this world is an illusion of your own creating, you can wake up and throw the mountains in the sea. But again, that's just a trinket for fun thinking at this point. But know it to be true. Jesus emphatically said, verily, I tell you the truth. So know that to be the truth. All right, I'm going to say the chant, and then Terry will close us out, and then I'll just hang out here for the next little while, that if anybody has any more to ask or talk about. Om Sarvesham Swastir Bhavatu Sarvesham Shantir Bhavatu Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May there be well-being in all. May there be peace in all. May there be fulfillment in all. May there be auspiciousness in all. Om, peace, peace, peace.
Thank you, Swami C. This has been a wonderful time with you.
Yes, I've enjoyed it also. Thank you very much for the time. My attachment to you as a congregation and an idea grows every time I meet you guys and hang out with you. I really, really enjoy it. So how do we do this, Terry? Are they just open up their mics and speak? People are,
They can send a chat to me and I can recognize them.
And there's also, Swami C, there's another page of questions.
Oh, shall I keep going through them?
Depends.
All right.
What do people want? Or what do you want? Or what do people want?
I have no predetermined will in this.
I think that our plan was to, at this point, stop the formal part and just allow people who wanted to stay to ask questions. And if there are a lot of us, you can send me a chat and I will recognize you in the order of the chat I receive, not the question, just that you want to be recognized.
Yeah, and the remaining question that's here, I will email a response to that, to the person who asked it.
Okay.
So, all right. Yes. Oh, I'm not the chooser, I forgot.
Well, I haven't received any chat from anyone.
It's
Have
hard.
Marjorie's
Okay,
put up a hand.
Don Booth, could you, do you have a question, Don? No, okay.
No. I'm trying to, there, okay.
Anyone else have a question they would like to ask? Marjorie?
One of the experiences I had in thinking about Brother Lawrence's teachings was that there was a dualism involved, and that it seems like there's a sense that the material world is bad or wrong or delusional, and of the ego versus the spiritual world, which is viewed as good. But what about the alternative theology that actually emphasizes that all is good, including the material world, because God made it all? And doesn't it then follow that God wants us to enjoy what God made?
Part of that is true. Yes, there is no, evil has no inherent existence. Okay, evil is the shadow of good, and what causes the shadow is ego. You know, on the 9/11, as I stood there watching planes fly into the high rises in New York City, I thought that I was witnessing pure evil. I was like, oh my God. But then I guess it was that evening or something, there was some filming of Baghdad and young men of my same age dancing in joy in the streets over the same event. And I thought to myself, well, how is it that pure evil is not recognized as evil? And I began to think about it, that my sense of evil comes from my sense of identity. I am an American. I am, a Vedantist. From that perspective, that event was horribly evil. Now, if I had been a man, an Iranian, and I had been Muslim, and I had felt the effects of colonialism and whatnot, all of that is up for political conversation, which I'm not interested in jumping into, but take for a moment the possibility that their identity was quite different, and for them that was a triumph. And I began to think about that evil is a perception based on ego, based on my sense of identity. Because had a volcano blown up and equally killed 3,000 people, I would not have thought that I was watching evil. I was just watching the way things are, because there was no counter identity in which to electrify my sense of evil, my sense of blame. And so that's the nature of things. Now, in this, so it is true that all things are of God and the only motivating force in the world is love. That is true. My ego will not allow me to experience that until it is of the same will as the divine. The divine can see both sides of the coin simultaneously, and they are equal. I, as having chosen a perspective or a particular, cannot see both sides of the coin equally. And so therefore will see one side as good and one side as evil. I also believe in the independent existence of all things. And so I will see somebody die, even though the reality of it is that the soul is eternal. Nobody dies, bodies die, and all bodies die, no matter whether they're killed or they wait off the time to do it naturally. It's like, it's funny how we make that distinction. So there isn't any evil as an inherent existence in the creation. All is of God. But you cannot understand that until you have the heart of God, until you have the understanding of God and the perspective of the divine, till you, in a sense, know what God knows, that there's an infinite amount of variables that you as a particular will never be able to know that God does know. And all of that together, the sages say that each moment is perfect as it is, and that is the difference between the sage and the sinner, is that the sage can know that the moment is perfect and be comfortable in it as it is, whereas the sinner is constantly trying to improve the moment, constantly trying to change the moment, change the heat, give me more food, get new drapes, whatever it is. So that's the difference. The creation is perfect from God's vantage point because it is the divine. He sees all at once. And when you wake up, when you come to your realization, when you come to that unitive experience, you can equate it to, it's not the same thing, but you can use it again. The idea of the dream. You know, bad things happen in dreams. And when you wake up, you don't go on a crusade about all the bad things that happened in your dream, because you come to realize it was all you, and that it was a play of mind and nobody was hurt. Nothing really happened. It all came and it all went. I suffered, I was afraid, I ran, I sweat, I was hungry, I fell off a building, whatever. In the morning when you wake up, it's enough for you to know, oh, phew, that was just a dream. And so all things resolve at realization when you wake up into your knowledge of the nature of all things. And your response to all of it is, that was fun. Wow, that was a crazy dream. Because nobody got hurt. Nobody was killed. Nobody was violated. You know, it was all a play. How's that for an answer?
Does anyone else have a question they would like to ask?
In the meantime, I'll go on to say just the fact that it's not necessarily that some actions are evil and some actions are good. It's more like what St. Paul says. He says, all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. And so for those of us who want to know our nature, we want to know the beloved, there are things in the world that are helpful, and not that those are all the commands in the scriptures, all the teachings of the sages are helpful to knowing God. Those things that are not helpful to knowing God are considered evil when you're within the dream. Those are the evil things, or the wrong things. In truth, they're just the non-helpful things to that realization. And so, yeah.
May I ask a follow-on of that, if no one else has a thought, which is, so how do we confront or live with the reality of hate and hurt, murder, rape, environmental destruction? How do we understand that in this
Well, the first
system?
one is don't do it. And the second one, do as you are inspired to do. Do as you're inspired to do. So, you know, if you are inspired to stand up and make more noise than just not doing it, that's fine. That is your calling. In the moment, God will move you as you need to be moved. Listen to him and be obedient. And when the move comes to drop everything you own and sell it and give it to Greenpeace, don't hesitate. Do it. And that's it. You know, be in tune with the moment, be present in the moment, but do not project your idea of what should be on the world at large. Follow your inspiration from within, and it happens without mind. It happens without calculation, without reasoning. It happens because it comes from the spirit, from the nature of the self deep within, and arises. You feel compelled to save that person. You feel compelled to serve that person. You feel compelled to write that letter. You feel compelled to go to that march, you know. But the sense of should isn't there. If you feel the inspiration or the inner compulsion, obey. That is the beloved. If you don't, be in your moment. Be pure with what God has put around you. Do your duty within your sphere of existence. You know, because sometimes we need people that are just doing things for the neighbors as much as we need somebody out cleaning up the beaches of Mexico. you know, so it's not a one size fits all. Mother's going to inspire some to ignore what's going on the global stage
Hmm.
and to take care of the old woman next door. That's their role. That's their inspiration. And some of us, she's going to put on the world political stage and insist that you go out there and fight for the beaches of Mexico. It's each person is called and inspired to what is best within their limits of power, understanding, and capability to reach for the divine. And so really the best part of it is keep your eyes inward and know your calling. Hear the voice of the beloved and go.
Swami,
Yes.
this is Lucia and Terry and Marjorie. I hope you don't mind my interrupting, but I just have guests, and I wanted to thank you for such a delightful retreat these past 2 days. You have really inspired me. I always loved Brother Lawrence.
Yeah.
I've been a member of the Immaculate Heart community
Mm.
and was a sister, and then now we moved into a lay community. And I particularly appreciate the consciousness of how you have translated his words. It's really enlivened them for me. And I want to thank you and bless you for your great work. I hope I can come on another retreat.
Oh, wonderful.
And thank you, all of you, for being participating. It's been like with most retreats, you don't talk, but then you feel very close to everybody.
Mhm, mhm.
So blessings. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Thank you. Thank you.
Greg, do you have a question? No.
He's waving at Lucia.
He was saying
Wait.
goodbye.
Yeah, I was just saying goodbye to her.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. I appreciate that.
Bye. Okay.
Bye. I'm trying to get my little arrow down. Blessings. Bye. Oh, gosh. Okay.
All right.
Still on. I'm still on. You see what happens? You get attached, I guess. Or my computer is attached.
As long as you're aware, you're all
There's-
right.
True.
There's a little red box that says leave on the
know.
bottom right.
I have a cushion and it's not cooperating with. I'll get there though. You go on and I'll wave goodbye as I get my arrow down.
All right. And were you waving goodbye too? I thought I saw you waving. You were just waving goodbye also. All right. Well, my email address is monkotronic@gmail.com. So if anybody at any time wants to shoot off a conversation of any kind on any topic, I'm delighted and available and would look forward to it. So if there's no
Great.
more questions, we'll leave it at that until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Yes, touch the
Thank
beloved.
you so much.
Really. Bless. Bye.
Bye-bye.